3 серпня.
It's August 3rd, Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform starts its operation. My name is Svetlana Cheparenko. Now we will be talking about the situation in Odessa region and the aftermath of the latest shelling. Joining us online is Natalya Humenyuk, head of the United Coordination Press Center of the Security and Defense Forces South. Good morning, Miss Natalia. Good morning. Glory to Ukraine. Glory to the heroes. Miss Natalia, lately the enemy was inflicting strikes on Odessa region and the south of Ukraine in general. They were targeting the Ukrainian grain silos, the seaports. What are the consequences of the strikes for the time being? Well, the consequences are mostly in attempts by the enemy to convince the freight companies that Ukrainian ports are unable to operate in the mode required to ensure the food security of the countries of the world. So their main task is to demonstrate that the security component doesn't work, that the capacities are out of operation, to switch attention of everybody to them and to propose their own monopoly in the Black Sea and in the grain market. For the time being, we may state that after the end of the grain deal, in its legitimate condition, Russia started a fire activity by the attacks of the grain transportation infrastructure of Ukraine. For the time being, we have documented 7 such attacks, very intense and destructive. But we may state that in fact the port infrastructure of Ukraine is ready even tomorrow to resume the operation within the framework of the grain deal and to fulfill our obligations. So regardless of the scale of destruction of the port infrastructure, Ukraine, as the country which complies with its obligation, is capable of ensuring the operation of the seaports and to ensure the security component. The only thing we need is the international support, just like it was before. We need the guarantees of Turkey and the United Nations guarantees. And in such cooperations, our efforts were bringing fruitful results. Well, yesterday there were statements by the enemy that Ukraine was trying to attack a civilian transport in the Black Sea with an unmanned cutter. Can you give us any comments on that? Well, first of all, we don't comment any statements by the enemy because nobody trusts them anymore, and we have to understand that in the conditions of the hybrid war, the enemy deploys the information front very intensely, and the fact that they prepare provocations in the Black Sea is something that we were warning about beforehand. And this is one of provocations that even in the information front can be developed in a way like this. So there were no any evidences of such facts, no proofs. There was just a statement of the Ministry of Killing of Russian Federation, and that's pretty much it. As a rule, it may be provoking of Ukraine to some actions or intimidation of the sea freight companies who try to cooperate with Ukraine. The Russians were trying to block the territorial sea of Ukraine and navigation there for a long time. They were doing it since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, when in March they proclaimed that northwestern part of the Black Sea is closed due to the anti-terroristic operation. No one has seen that operation apart from the shelling of the sea vessels that were trying to enter the ports of Ukraine. Then there was operation of the grain corridor against international guarantees, but there was no other navigation than that in the Black Sea. Thank you. The enemy has brought the missile carrier ships in huge quantities to the Black Sea. What is the behavior of the enemy that you are tracking, and can that evidence about another missile attack? Well, the enemy has 17 vessels that we may observe in the Black Sea, and they are not all aggressive ships. However, given the conditions of war, we consider every such unit in detail, and we may expect provocations from them as well. Why do we report about this number of vessels in the sea? Because this number includes both battleships of the Black Sea Fleet, but also the logistic vessels that can take part in such provocations and carry reconnaissance UAVs, for example. They are also the bodyguard service vessels that cruise along the shore of Crimea, and they can take part in provocations too. So it's important to cover the number of the enemy vessels that we observed. So we see 2 missile carriers among those 17 ships, which pose the real threat about which we report separately. Both carriers can carry up to 12 missiles in total, and we mark the level of missile threat as red. We observe the activity of strategic and tactical aviation, which may tell us about the preparation of another missile strike. We've also seen a pause between the strikes of a mixed type with the use of missile weapons. Yet another indicator of their preparation is the fact that they only use drone attacks to identify the air defense positions of our troops. That's the cheaper way to identify the way our air defense systems operate. So at this stage we may draw a conclusion. After an intense attack on the Danube ports, it's quite probable to expect another missile strike with the use of air to surface and sea to surface missile. The enemy also uses the artillery complex Bastion that uses type Onyx missile for shelling of port infrastructure. There was yet another post which was related to explosion in Jankoy, but we have to remember that the enemy doesn't stop, and even losing something, they try to resume their aggression. So let's stay vigilant but not resort to panic. Thank you very much. Do you see any indicators of shell deficit with the enemy after their attack and our attack on their storage facilities? Yes, we had certain achievements last week. There was intense work on the field storages of the enemy in the left bank of Dnieper. We were able to destroy 7 such logistic hubs that resulted in deficit of shells with the enemy. Well, they caught up with the logistics a little bit. Now they had their logistic complicated as a result of our cautious and precise work on their logistic hubs, but they sometimes make it catching up with the reserves and resumption of operation of vehicles and replenishment with the personnel. But it's not in line with the development of the battle operations, so sometimes the enemy loses opportunity to attack, and the shelling in our sector of the front was falling down to 30 per day. So that was the indicator of shell deficit. Then we've seen them catching up with their logistics a little bit. They brought the indicator of shelling up to 90 per day, and continuing our counter battery fight, we continue moving them in the depth from the left bank so they don't have an opportunity of remote shelling. And on top of that, there is -2 storages of enemy supply Within the last day, we see there were 54 shellings, which is a significant reduction. Thank you. In July, the enemy has recalled the existence of the Snake Island. There were 3 bombings, what they can be related to. Again, it happened right after the end of the grain deal, and the enemy was trying to establish their presence in the Black Sea to demonstrate their capabilities using the tactical aviation. We don't conceal it, we adequately evaluate the enemy capabilities. They have advantage in the air with the aviation, and playing with that, they have demonstrated such a gesture as if they are capable of making all the way there and bombing us over there. So first of all, they were bombing not the island itself but the sector. They were not able to target the island, but 3 such missions were meant to pose a threat from the air for international civil vessels that could be on the way to Ukrainian ports. So it was all to demonstrate the pressure on the civil navigation with the view of prospects of the grain deal. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. Do we have questions on the floor? Good morning, Olga Panasenko, Ukrinform. International organizations are urging Russia to stop terrorism against Ukrainian ports, but it doesn't seem to work really. So do you see any indicators of NATO members to resort to some more serious steps in case of occasional targeting by Russian missiles of European ships or their territories? Well, they will mostly be governed by the NATO statute, where the procedures are set forth quite strict, but we know that the reaction of the global community is always very weighted with the view of further prospects. And fighting so bravely such a violent, cowardly enemy as Russia is something that only Ukraine is capable of. The rest of the countries have more weighted and diplomatic approach, because the threat for them is more of a remote nature. So talking about occasional and non-occasional targeting of the foreign vessels, during the full-scale invasion there were such facts documented, but the reaction of the global community is, I would say, feeble, because the countries flags of which the vessels were carrying did not react in the scale that would have been necessary for condemnation to initiate such an intense reaction experience. So we hope that the statements such as made by leader of Romania about the direct threat to his country and to what they could see with their own eyes with the view of attacks on the port of Danube, it may be something to stimulate the global community to use more serious measures against Russia. So, because until now there are no effective solutions as to the continuation of the grain deal operation in compliance with the rules acceptable for the civilized countries of the world. Ms. Natalya, thank you very much for sharing the situation in the South. I'm reminding you, joining us was Natalya Humenyuk, head of the United Coordinating Press Center of Security and Defense Forces of the South. And Ukraine Media Center will continue its operation at 12 o'clock. Visiting us will be Viola von Krammen, member of the European Parliament, vice chair of the delegation of the EU-Ukraine Parliamentary Association Committee. Stay tuned.